Welcome. The Governance and Policy Committee meeting of Wednesday, May 29th, 2024 will now come to order. Trustees are reminded that as this is a committee, it is the appropriate place for discussion of agenda items before they proceed to board as applicable. Following staff presentations of each report, discussion will be open for trustees. I will begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest tonight? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the draft agenda? Thank you, Trustee Morton, seconded by Trustee Miller. All in favor? Thank you. The agenda is approved. It doesn't matter so much for approving the agenda, but please do remember today to use your cards so that people watching the live stream are able to see where the votes are. May I please have a motion to approve the draft minutes of the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of April 24th, 2024? Thank you, Trustee Morton. Can I get a seconder? Trustee Miller, thank you. All in favor? That passes. Thank you. The minutes are approved. We have two information items coming forward this evening for information. The first one is an update on the Human Rights Advisory Committee, and I will turn it over to Associate Director Jim Markowski.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Cunningham. Just before I begin, we felt it was important to have two distinct reports, one for the Human Rights Advisory Committee and one for the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee, as they function as separate entities. But much of the information I'll be sharing this evening will be similar for both items. So do you have any concerns if I speak to 6A and 6B together?
Does anyone have any concerns? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the Human Rights Advisory Committee report begins on page 6 of your package this evening. The Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee report begins on page 19 of your package this evening. And the purpose of the reports is to provide the Governance and Policy Committee with an update on the actions taken to establish the Human Rights Advisory Committee and the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. On March 27th, the Board of Trustees, through the Governance and Policy Committee, received and approved a revised critical path and selection criteria to establish both of the committees. Within your report this evening, in both reports, we've updated the critical path to reflect key actions that have been completed since the March report was shared with you. Specifically, district staff have drafted the posting for the open invitation for expressions of interest based on the approved selection criteria. Again, that's for both committees. We've shared the posting for both committees through social media, board committees, and other relevant communication methods. And we reviewed all the applications that have been received. There were 7 in total for the Human Rights Advisory Committee and 4 in total for the Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. And based on the approved selection criteria, we've invited some applicants to participate in conversational interviews, and that is still in progress. As outlined in the month of June within the critical path, 2 trustees will need to be elected at the June board meeting and will serve on the committee in its first cycle until the November 2025 organizational meeting. During the November 2025 organizational meeting and in each subsequent year, trustee representatives for the advisory committee will be nominated and selected. So this evening, we share these updates with you, and we remind trustees that those 2 trustees will need to be appointed in the month of June so that we can move forward with the items that are outlined in the critical path for the fall months. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Markowski. May I ask if anyone has any discussion or questions? Trustee Edwards?
Thank you. I appreciate the path that was put together and it's well laid out and concise. I just had a question around financial implications. Does make a comment that, costs may occur, including maybe a possibility of consultant fees, and I'm just wondering, does that come back to the board if they are of a significant cost?
Thank you, and through you. To answer your question, Trustee Edwards, right as it stands, I don't foresee any significant costs, but as we're going to be providing updates through the development of the committees and as they're established, I would anticipate if there was any significant fees, we could make sure that they're captured within a report.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for those two reports.
Chair Cunningham,
Yes?
thank you. I just wondered if I might ask a question.
Apologies, I didn't see your hand raised.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Just wondering, with respect to community involvement, will the selection process be complete at the June board meeting?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Cunningham. So in relation to your question, Trustee Thatcher, as it stands, we had a total between both committees. There were 7 for the Human Rights Advisory Committee and 4 for the Anti-Black Racism Committee. We're using the criteria and working through the recruitment process. I would anticipate in the fall, we will likely need to have additional postings out. What we would foresee as a kind of a total membership for each committee will likely not be achieved through this round of posting, but we'll give you an update in the fall in terms of how many members there are and our continued efforts to secure members within both committees.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the recommended action items today. The first is the rescission of facility services regulations coming from Associate Director David Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. The report begins on page 31 of your package, and on page 32, you'll find 4 policies and 3 regulations that we are recommending for rescission. The rationale is included in the package, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Associate Director Wright? May I have a motion to move the recommended action as included in this report? Trustee Edwards, may I get a seconder? Trustee Arsenault? This item is open for discussion. Any further questions from trustees? I will now ask trustees to vote using their voting cards. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Action item number 7B is the rescission of equity and inclusive education policy and regulation from Superintendent Margaret Lazarus.
Good evening, and through you, Chair Cunningham. The purpose of this report is to recommend to this body the rescission of the equity and inclusive education policy and regulation, and it can be found beginning on page 41 of your package. In 2013, PPM 119 from the Ministry of Education directed all school boards to establish and implement the equity and inclusive education policy. In May 2022, the DDSB Board of Trustees passed a comprehensive human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy, which outlines DDSB's commitment to upholding the rights of all students, families, employees, and community members. In addition, the DDSB also developed 4 related procedures to support the operational implementation of the human rights policy, which can be found on page 46 of your package. Equity and inclusive principles are embedded throughout the human rights policy and procedures. In developing the human rights policy, staff referred and included requirements under the ministry's PPM 119 strategy and policy guidelines, as well as the current DDSB's equity policy, and thus it aligns with the intent and requirements of PPM 119. The human rights policy and procedure, along with the Indigenous education policy, includes and goes beyond the expectations of PPM 119 and are an enhancement of DDSB's original equity policy and regulations, thus rendering them redundant. It is for these reasons that we are recommending rescission of the current equity and inclusive policy and regulations and implementing, of course, our human rights policy in its place. We want you to note that we have included in your package Appendix B, which outlines and shows how the PPM requirements are addressed throughout the human rights policy and procedures. It also includes examples, but it is not an exhaustive list. We just wanted to give you a flavor of exactly how our human rights policy certainly encompasses all of the requirements of PPM 119. In summary, the themes and intent of PPM 119 are reflected in the full human rights policy and procedure package. For the website, please note also, staff will include communication on the DDSB's equity and anti-oppression webpage that will redirect staff, parents, students, and community members who may be looking for the equity policy to the human rights policy and related web pages. So this is my report, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Superintendent Lazarus. May I get a trustee willing to move the recommended motion as included in this report? Trustee Elsina, seconder. Trustee Morton. This item is now open for discussion and any questions from trustees. Seeing none, all those in favor, please use your cards. This action carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 7C, the revised criminal background checks policy by Superintendent Heather Mundy.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The report is found starting on page 65 of your package. The current policy under Appendix B was originally created in 2005 and was last updated in 2012. The policy has been updated to clearly identify the requirements for employees, volunteers, service providers, and other individuals to provide criminal background checks, as well as provisions where vulnerable sector checks are also required. The policy now specifically defines the two types of background checks and includes updated language that aligns with the Regulation 521 of the Education Act. For information purposes, the updated procedure, Appendix 6, is provided and now aligns with the definitions and requirements under the policy. The recommendation is that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that the criminal background checks policy be revised and that the matter be considered at the next meeting of the Board of Trustees. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a trustee willing to move the recommended motion as included in this report? Trustee Arsenault, seconded by Trustee Edwards. This item is now open for discussion and any questions from trustees. Seeing none, please use your cards. All those in favor? This item carries. Thank you. Moving on to 7D, the draft supervisory officer recruitment policy and rescission superintendent's policy and regulation by Director Camille Williams-Taylor-Wright, Associate Director Jim Markovsky, Associate Director David Wright, and General Counsel Patrick Cotter.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Cunningham. The report can be found at page 77 of the package. The intent of the report and the enclosures is to rescind the prior policy on supervisory officer recruitment and the related regulation, and to replace it with a new policy. The new policy can be found at page 80 and 81 of the package. The crux of the new policy is firstly to expressly incorporate the board's equitable recruitment policy, procedure, and framework to ensure there's a fair, transparent, and consistent recruitment process for supervisory officers. That process includes a mandate for one member of the interview team to have completed bias-free training for conducting interviews. The second, I think, key piece to highlight is that the policy would remove members of the Board of Trustees from the hiring panel and process. And thirdly, does include a process for the Director of Education to keep the Board of Trustees informed in a timely way of vacancies and plans for hiring, a process, and timelines for filling any vacancies, and would include the Director reporting on the plan to establish any candidate pool. So subject to any questions you may have, that is the report, and the recommended action is found in section 3 on page 78 of the package.
Thank you. Is there a trustee willing to move the recommended motion? Trustee Edwards, seconded by Trustee Arsenault. This item is now open for discussion and questions. Trustee Morton?
I'm just curious to learn more about the removal of trustees from the process, because in the past, I've always enjoyed being part of that, and I regret that I would no longer be welcomed in that.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair Cunningham. So trustees may recall this matter had come before the committee at the prior iteration of the Board of Trustees, following upon the Peel report. And the Peel report looked at the governance framework at the Peel District School Board and the requirements of the Education Act, which stipulate that the Board of Trustees hires and supervises the Director of Education, but then there's a mandate on the board to leave the management of the corporation to the Director of Education. And the Peel report made pretty clear, as with prior reports, including the Wilson report in the Toronto District School Board, that management of the organization includes the director's discretion to hire the staff that the director deems appropriate, without the interference from the Board of Trustees. So it's really respecting the governance policy framework that the board obviously can supervise and direct the Director of Education, but really must leave the final decision on hiring of the director's staff to the director. That is an important piece of the accountability framework. If the board is going to hold the Director of Education to account for the performance, then it prevents that conflict of interest from the board having had a say in who the director hires. So it does allow the board, I think, to have a more accountable framework. The Education Act also provides supervisory officers with a statutory right to appeal any termination by the Director of Education. So the board would be involved in sort of a neutral arbiter in addressing any termination of a supervisory officer should that come forward. And had the board been involved in the hiring, that would present another layer of a potential conflict. So those are really the two key aspects, sort of the policy governance framework, which respects the role of the director CEO to hire the staff they deem appropriate, and to respect the sort of appeal role that the board fills under the Education Act. And it's not just, this is not really an opinion of staff. This has been confirmed in multiple reports from the ministry on board reviews, including most recently in the Peel review, where they, I think it was direction number 2, expressly directed that the board must establish a new hiring policy that would allow the director to exercise sole discretion on hiring any staff that report to the director.
Supplemental from Trustee Morton.
I'm just curious to learn more about the use of the word interference that you used.
Well, and I didn't, through you, Chair Cunningham, I didn't mean that in any, in any pejorative way. Interference meaning involvement. Involvement, I'm in a neutral way, just being in the process.
I never thought that I interfered with any.
No, fair comment, and as I said, I didn't mean it in a pejorative sense, but I mean interfere in the sense of being involved.
Trustee Cameron, Student Trustee Cameron?
Thank you, Chair. I just simply think it's not our job to hire the SOs, and that it is actually our legal obligation to not hire our SOs, because that's the director's job. You know, I would love to do a lot of things at the board, and sometimes you just can't. And this is one of those things that we need to fix.
Thank you, Student Trustee Cameron. Trustee Thatcher?
Thank you, and through you, Chair Cunningham. I do understand. I did have a question around the word interference myself, so I appreciate that that was raised. My question then is, with regards to these changes, would there be an opportunity then for 360 reviews or some similar type process for senior staff in addition to this change?
So through you, Chair Cunningham, in terms of the review process and the board's role in that, obviously the board has a director performance review policy, performance appraisal policy, and can review the performance of the Director of Education. That review could, of course, include the director's hiring, retention, and management of the senior team. So that would be certainly an important piece of what the board would want to ensure, that the director is hiring and retaining talent. But beyond that, sort of the supervision, the corrective directions given to SOs, any discipline, et cetera, would be within the purview of the director.
Supplemental?
Yes, go ahead.
Could I request then that that be added to an agenda for governance going forward so that we can have some further discussion?
Chair Thatcher, I'm not understanding. Are you asking to defer this?
I'm just wondering if we could have some further discussion around this, this matter, and maybe we could add that to an agenda going forward, a future agenda for governance.
So it will be up for discussion after the motion is on the floor tonight, but you could, of course, put forward a motion to defer it if you'd rather work through it at the next meeting.
Then I'd like to put forward a motion to defer discussion around that.
Director Williams-Taylor?
Just to clarify for understanding, Madam Chair, so when the trustee is requesting that it be deferred to another meeting, I guess the question that I would ask is what further information is required that is not present to add to a discussion. Typically, when there's a deferral, there's usually a reason for additional information being sought or for some clarification being required. So somewhat puzzled about what it is that is required further in order for a discussion to be fruitful and proper.
Trustee Thatcher?
Thank you, Director. I think that I would appreciate having an opportunity to have further discussion around a 360 assessment of senior staff when we have a more fulsome attendance of trustees.
Through you, Madam Chair, regarding the 360 assessment of superintendents, that's outside of the purview of the Board of Trustees. And so while it is that we certainly are working on enhancing our performance appraisal process for senior staff, that is securely within the purview of the Director's Office. So that's not something that, even with further discussion, it would not be appropriate for that to be included in a policy pertaining to the hiring of superintendents.
Perhaps, Director, you could take that under advisement.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not clear about taking under advisement, Chair. Perhaps you could clarify what you mean by that.
I just think that it would be a really good opportunity for us to extend our 360 review process.
Sorry, I can maybe assist a little bit, perhaps, and through you, Chair Cunningham. So, as indicated in the in my comments, this really is a compliance piece for the board. It's our view that and it's not just our view, as I said, it's confirmed in multiple reports to the Minister of Education following reviews of the conduct of boards of trustees, most recently in the Peel Board, where the Minister expressly directed that the trustees must remove themselves from hiring of supervisory officers. And
Yes.
That's a mandate from the Minister of Education that's confirmed in the Peel report, and that's consistent with the terms of the Education Act. So this is really a compliance piece. Hiring superintendents is, in our view, offside the provisions of the Education Act, and in having the board engage in the review of staff other than the Director of Education would be equally, if not more, problematic than participation in the hiring of superintendents.
Trustee Thatcher, knowing that this is a compliance piece, do you still wish to put forward a motion for deferral?
No, I'll withdraw that.
Thank you. Can I get a trustee willing to move the recommended motion as included in this report? Trustee Edwards, seconder. Trustee Morton. We have just had some discussion, but is there anything further anyone would like to question or add? Seeing none, please use your cards. All in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. We move on to action item 7E, the draft student trustee policy by General Counsel Cotter, as well as student trustees Cameron, Hoare, and Kasoju.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Cunningham. So the student trustees have come forward with a suggested student trustee policy, and I worked with the student trustees and in particular with student trustee Ben Cameron on the language, and it was provided to you under separate cover today. And apologies to the committee for the delayed delivery. And rest assured, it has nothing to do with any delay on the part of the student trustees. The backlog is entirely with me. The student trustee policy is designed primarily to make sure that there's language enshrined to support the student trustees in fulfilling their mandate. And with that, and with your leave, Madam Chair, I would leave it to student trustee Ben Cameron to provide some comments.
Thank you, Council Cotter. Student trustee Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I guess this policy kind of came about in understanding what a policy is meant for, and also understanding that a policy gets reviewed every 5 years, or should be reviewed every 5 years. And we also wanted to set the framework for making sure that we are supported and that the director has the mandate to support us in our work that we're doing. And just enshrine some things that we believe are really important and get us in line with most of the rest of the province who has a student trustee policy that is regularly reviewed. I'll say I looked at over 25 different student trustee policies from across the board when crafting this. And so I think it's a really just positive step forward for us. On the bylaw end, there are amendments in front of you that are tracked that basically just reflect different changes that have actually just come out of the bylaws into the policy for review. So that is that section. And I can speak to that as well if trustees have any questions, for sure.
Thank you, student trustee Cameron. Is there a trustee willing to move the adoption? Oh.
No, I was just going to add, just for clarity, in terms of the track changes on the bylaw, So the red strikeouts are the deletions. The blue language is additional language that's been added. So the red language that's been deleted is language that gets picked up in the policy. So that and then the blue language is just to provide a little bit more clarity. There's really nothing of substance, I don't think, in the changes that are outlined in blue.
Thank you for that clarification. Student trustee Cameron?
Yeah, thank you. I would just say there are just small things of substance I would highlight. For example, we used to have a requirement for Canadian citizenship in our bylaws, which is not compliant with the Education Act, which says you just have to be a pupil of the board. It is really little things like that that have changed.
Thank you. Is there a trustee willing to move this recommended motion? Trustee Morton, seconded by trustee Thatcher. This item is now open for discussion and questions from trustees. Trustee Thatcher?
Excuse me, Chair, sorry.
Oh, apologies.
So sorry, I had my hand up, but Christine can go first if she would like to do that.
Oh, Kayla, that's fine. You go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to comment quickly on the student trustee policy, and I just wanted to say that student trustee Ben and Council Cotter have put in so much work into this, and it has just been truly an incredible experience to be a part of kind of seeing how a policy actually gets put into place and created within our board. And I'm really excited to be able to just see this cohesive framework for our future trustees to continuously build off of, in the coming years. And once again, I'm just so incredibly grateful to be a part of this opportunity. So thank you to everybody that put in the hard work.
Thank you, student trustee Hoare. Question from trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I do agree with what Kayla just said. I actually was going to say that myself. I appreciate the changes, and I am in support of those changes. My question is around the point of order, and I know that we had some brief conversation about that earlier, but as it is a motion or considered a motion, what was the thinking around it? Could someone just explain, student trustee Cameron or Council Cotter, what our thinking was around that?
Sure, thank you very much, and through you, Chair Cunningham. So I think just for the benefit of everyone, I think the question you're raising relates to, if you look at the track changes on the bylaws, section 2.4.3, subsection A, Roman numeral 5, says that trustees have the right to raise a point of order, question of privilege, parliamentary inquiry, or point of information under section 5 of the bylaws. So the issue that Chair Thatcher is raising is given that student trustees are not permitted to raise a motion, should they be permitted to do these things that are listed on section 5? And I've taken the position that and I would advise, in my view, for your consideration, of course, it's your call, but that it's if a student trustee is raising a point of order and the chair agrees with it, it is essentially a consent motion. There's no objection to it. There'd be no reason not to consider a helpful point of order from a student trustee. If the chair rejects it, the student trustee would have no power to appeal it. That would still have to require a member of the board to appeal the chair's ruling. So it still really rests with the chair and the members. The student trustee merely has the ability to raise the point of order. If it's rejected, there's nothing the student trustee can do about it.
Thank you. Is there any further questions or discussion? Using your cards, all in favor? This motion carries. Thank you. For action item 7F, the motion is one that I intend to put forward, so I am going to ask Vice Chair Miller to take over the chair role for this item.
We now have the following motion to be presented by Trustee Cunningham, and I will allow her to present her motion.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Miller. I first of all want to apologize that this motion is coming late. There was much back and forth about the wording of the motion. Jillian, if you could put it up on the screen. I'd like to, in light of the new strategic plan and its emphasis on Indigenous rights, as well as the fact that many school boards right now are reassessing their Indigenous rights policy in order to be sure that they are as aligned as possible with reconciliation, I would like to see us do the same. So the motion that I would like to put forward is I move that the Governance Committee ask staff to prepare a report on all the policies currently related to Indigenous education and how they align with our new strategic plan. We'd also like to see the impact that since these policies were implemented.
The motion is on the floor. May I have a seconder for that motion? Recognize Trustee Morton as seconder. The motion is now open for discussion. Is there any questions or comments for discussion? Recognizing Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. I do not have a problem, but I'm grappling of what do you mean by see the impact since the policies. I'm not sure in what kind of information you're looking to come back with from the staff.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Policies should bring about change within the school system, hopefully for the best if we've done our job appropriately. Knowing that the staff has, of course, implemented the policies, I'd like us to take a look to make sure that the policies we have on the books are the ones that are doing their absolute best to bring us as close as possible to reconciliation. It's a check to make sure that we're on the right path and that we are in the best possible place.
Trustee Edwards, does that answer your question?
Not quite, because I understand that that's what you're looking for, but I don't know how, like the report is coming from staff, but I'm not sure exactly what you're asking staff to, how to show the impact. Are you asking for specific data? Or are you asking for specific, like I'm not, anecdotal information, I'm still not clear on what you're asking staff to do other than a report. Thank you.
Trustee Cunningham. I'm just going to allow for Trustee Cunningham to respond since they were in conversation, then I will turn over to Trustee Ben Cameron.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. We would be looking to the Director of Education to use information available, such as data from things like the positive student climates, but as well as consultation with some of the Indigenous groups that we may have available to us to ensure that people feel that the policies in place are as effective as they can be.
Is there any further discussion, questions?
Chair Miller?
Yes, recognizing Trustee Thatcher. Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I fully support this motion. My understanding of the impact on the policies has to do with the fact that it is a mandate of the Board of Trustees to monitor policies for the effectiveness of those policies. That's That's what I'm understanding that means. And I think some of these were quite new to us when they were originally implemented. And I think it would be timely for us to take a look at where we are with those policies and whether or not we need to make any changes going forward. So just to say, I fully support the motion. Thank you.
I recognize Trustee Morton.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I can see that we want to look at the data, but I would be a lot more comfortable if we were specifically looking at certain policies. So if we could have a broad idea as to all the policies and then ask staff to gather data on 1, 2, or 3, because I'm not sure what kind of a workload we are asking staff to come forward with.
Any further comments and questions? Can I ask for some staff commentary regarding this motion?
Through you, Chair, if I may. To the question about staff load, it certainly would be an interpretation of what is required. Certainly, the Chair has rightly pointed out that it is within the purview of the Board of Trustees to ask questions pertaining to the implementation of the policies that have been passed. This motion is quite complicated in that it asks for all policies currently related to Indigenous education, of which there are a few, and then what is the nature of the impact. And so that certainly lends itself subject to a variety of levels of interpretation. So I do believe that we would be looking at a reasonably significant period of time to undertake this kind of engagement if it's to be done properly. And I think that we would have to think about an architecture for what it is that would go into a report that would give trustees the kind of information that they would need to be able to get a sense of the nature of the implementation. So my suggestion would be if it is that this motion is passed, that there would be a significant purview left with the staff around how it is that we would be building forward an opportunity to bring this back in terms of timeline, architecture, and content. So that would be the input that I would have. And so if the trustees are willing to be patient and open in terms of that capacity, we will do our best to build something that meets with that expectation, that allows for trustees to be able to get a sense of what has been done to carry out the expectations within the policies that have been established by trustees.
Thank you, Director Taylor. I just would like to ask Trustee Cunningham if she is still comfortable with the motion on the floor and if she has any further comments before we call a vote.
I'm still comfortable with the motion on the floor. I don't see this motion as being something that is highly urgent. So I am fully comfortable with the staff taking as long as they feel they need in order to pull this report together in a way that helps us do our jobs better.
Last call for further discussion or any questions regarding this motion. I recognize Trustee.
Chair, I'm sorry.
Was your hand up? Sorry, Trustee Thatcher?
No, it wasn't, actually. I should have put my hand up. Go ahead if someone else is wanting to speak. I'll put my hand up in the meantime.
Okay, no worries. Thank you, Trustee Arsenault.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I agree with Trustee Morton. This is kind of very broad motion. If there's something more specific or more detailed for staff to look into, so we can take a look at that, that might be better than having them pull every policy that they have, Indigenous policy that they have, and then taking a look at it. because unless there's a reason, like unless we know for a fact something's not working, then we need to start pulling it apart and seeing where we can fix things. But we're just pulling out everything and saying, okay, everything looks good. That's a lot of work for staff to do. So if you can be more specific about what you're looking for them to bring a report back.
Thank you, Trustee Arsenault. I recognize Trustee Thatcher online.
Thank you, Chair. I was just curious to know in terms of timing, but perhaps we need to see if the motion is carried first, just in terms of timing, what we might be looking at. So maybe not the fall, but what are we, number of months, 6 months? Is there any indication of timing?
Recognizing Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you. If someone wants to answer Chair Thatcher's question first, then I can return to Trustee Arsenault.
Thank you, through you, Chair. There are a few questions that remain for me, so it would depend on to Trustee Arsenault's question about specificity. If we were looking for something particular, that would be a different. That would allow for one kind of timeline. If we are creating the architecture, that would be a different kind of timeline. I can't anticipate that an interrogation that will require consultation and engagement would come before the board before the winter, and I would be thinking of probably a January standing that allows for the fall to engage in the nature of discussion that you might be looking for. I say that without any discussion whatsoever with the team, because there would be definitely a team engagement as well as an IAC engagement, and the IAC engagement may very well inform a different path. So I'm making a supposition on my part, but I certainly would be very clear that, in the interest of what this is intended to do, it certainly would not be a quick turnaround.
Recognizing Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Some of the thinking that I had when it came to this motion is some of the discussion that we've had lately and that we've heard from some of our Indigenous consultants is whether or not policies align back with recommendations from various reports, including Truth and Reconciliation. I didn't want to make this policy so narrow as to only focus on that, because there are many things that we could consider, but that is where my thinking was, in that we heard about taking action and perhaps aligning better with some of the reports, including Truth and Reconciliation, so ensuring we're on the path of discussions that have been had and advice we've been given.
Turning over to Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I'm curious to know if you've had this discussion with the Indigenous Advisory Committee.
Trustee Cunningham.
I have not, but I would hope that that would be one of the input sources going into this report.
Okay, moving on to Trustee Ben Cameron. Student Trustee Ben.
Thank you, Chair. On that point of the IAC, they're not just something you walk over and say, hey, IAC, what do you think of this? It's a little more detailed than that. And so I think personally coming to the board is an appropriate step before we get on that train, for sure.
Okay, I think each person has had an opportunity to speak. Is there any more comments before we call the vote? Any more questions or comments? Online? Okay, seeing none, I would like to call the vote. All in favor? We have Okay, so. Okay, all in favor, can we have all the cards in favor only? 1, 2. We have 3 in favor. Thank you. All opposed? Okay, I need my card. I need my card. We have 3 opposed. We have and 3 in favor. 3 in favor. Okay, we have.
Was it a 3-3?
We have 3 in favor and 3 opposed. This motion fails. Okay, we have.
Chair Miller, don't forget, I don't know if you've seen, but both Christine and I are also
Yes.
voting online.
Yes, we counted the votes online.
Thank you.
Did you get Tracy?
We didn't get Tracy. Okay, so we need to call the vote again. We recognized Christine online. I did not see your hand raised. Okay, so we'll need to call the vote again. Can I have all the votes in favor? Okay, that's 3 in favor. May I have all the opposed?
The tie. You don't need to ask.
Is there anyone abstaining?
You don't ask that.
Okay.
It's 3-3.
Okay, again, we are 3 in favor and 3 opposed. This motion fails. I will now return the chair seat to Trustee Cunningham so we can proceed with the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll ask if there is any other business needing to be discussed tonight. Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. We will take a recess before coming into our follow-up meeting.